You're listening to the Sales School podcast. I'm your host, Bhaskar Medi, and today it is my distinct pleasure to welcome our guest, Krishna Swarna. Krishna, welcome to the Sales School podcast.
Thank you, Bhaskar. Thank you for having me.
So, the folks who know you call you KC, and I have known
Yes.
you for a fairly long time, so I'm going to call you KC on the record as well, if that's okay with you.
Yeah, totally fine.
Casey is the head of customer success at Upshot.ai. We'll learn a little bit about what that is. He also leads platform strategy at Xcube Labs. Casey was a product manager at a company called InMage Systems, which, for those who probably don't know, acquired by Microsoft. Casey has spent some time as a technology solutions professional at Microsoft as well, following the acquisition. Towards the end of our discussion, I will make an attempt to get to know Casey a little more personally. But for now, let's go ahead and get started with our discussion topic here today. How do you really guarantee a win with very powerful solution? I particularly love this topic because great solutioning versus average solutioning, in my opinion, is really the difference between meeting or missing your sales quota. Yeah, you can really have a massive pipeline and very poor conversion because your solutioning is poor or average. Or you can have a relatively small pipeline, but when that is combined with top-notch world-class solutioning, you can dramatically improve your conversions and consequently your revenue. Such is the power of solution. So let's dive right in. Casey, you're the head of customer success at Upshot.ai. What is Upshot.ai? And what is a good set of KRA for a modern customer success function?
Okay. So Upshot.ai is a platform that helps digital companies engage their users on their digital properties. You see more and more companies moving to digital ways of serving the customer needs. For example, they're building mobile applications, they are investing in web portals. And when they do that, that's just the first step. The second step is to make sure that this product actually meets the user's needs. So a great part of that game is in the mechanisms of how to engage the customers on those devices and prevent uninstall at a very basic level. And once the app is fairly uninstall proof, if I can put it that way,
Sure.
then you increase the interactions between the app and the user.
Sure.
So Upshot allows you to go on that journey from putting out an app in the market and then being in control and taking your users along with you on that journey so that they turn into loyal users and retained users and contribute to your business. So
Sure.
that is Upshot. It does this by mixing traditional forms of communication like email, SMS, and push notifications, along with the cutting edge ideas like gamification and user psychology.
So one part of the problem is obviously building your digital asset. The
Yeah.
other, probably more complex equation is the adoption.
Yes, so that it can realize the purpose for which it was born. So the customer success KRAs, one is retention. We aim at 100% retention. And next is we look at satisfaction in the form of NPS, very high ratings on NPS surveys. And then ensuring that the lifetime value of the customers is high. Some people call it being profitable, some people call it growing, but whichever way you look at it, it's lifetime value. We do that by constantly watching out for what other problems can we solve.
Sure.
And then after doing all this, we want to also gather powerful social proof from these clients in the form of testimonials and case studies so that when we go to the next client, we are that much more confident of solving their problems also.
Makes sense. Casey, we started our topic with why solutioning is so important. I think it's a bit of a misunderstood term as well. So, for the benefit of our audience, can you help us understand solutioning at a first principles level?
I love the mention of first principles because it's very powerful. So if you apply that first principles thinking to solutioning, it actually turns out that it's a fancy word for making people happy by removing obstacles on their way to their own goals. We don't tell them where they ought to go, they choose the goal, but on their journey towards that goal, they will encounter various problems, both expected problems as well as unexpected problems.
Mhm.
So I define solutioning as the art of having that complete journey in your mind and then expecting all these circumstances to crop up and then preparing to overcome them or to go around them right from the beginning so that there is no surprise value and people are well informed and confident on their way to the goal.
Okay. So let me ask you the question a little differently. So if your VP of sales comes to you and he or she tells you, Casey, we need a great solution to win this deal. What do you think he or she actually means? What is it that he or she needs from you?
Well, I know I've known you for a long time. You have a talent for asking difficult questions. So it could mean two things, Bhaskar. One is, hey, you better give me something that will ensure that we win this. So he's got one eye on victory and it's part of his job description. But because there is no way of winning, at least no way of winning every time without making the customer also win, it has to speak to two parties at the same time. I always look for that balance of, am I solving the problem for the prospect and am I solving it profitably? So if I combine those, I get one single statement. Am I solving the problem profitably? Except profitably, the first part is meant for the client actually. It's not meant for me. The last part is meant for the company. VP sales is probably saying, hey, find out a way we can solve this problem so I can win this deal. But make sure that we don't get killed after we start implementing this.
Obviously, solutioning can be very simple for a transactional type of a product or technology, or can be extremely complex for a transformational initiative. Have you, in your experience, Casey, observed a set of very common mistakes that we continue to make?
Yeah, I have seen from very close quarters certain patterns that I would not call them mistakes, but I would say that those things are better not done for very good reasons. First one that comes to my mind is focusing excessively on victory. So somewhere it stops being about the problem and the solution and about winning somehow. So I feel like having that emotional pressure which we impose on ourselves, that I must win this deal, I must win this deal, constantly almost chanting it subconsciously, it makes us exert a lot of pressure on ourselves that prevents the best type of rational thinking sometimes. We should want to win, but we should not continuously think about winning because that will prevent us from actually winning, which is to find a good solution and a profitable solution. The second, it's an offshoot of this first point. Excessive focus on winning causes a pattern where we start looking for short-term, non-strategic inputs. We start asking the salesperson, what does your contact think we must do to win this? We might play into some non-essential factors there and leave out the more important parts of the solution. The last two ones I would say is creating what I call shallow differentiation, which is a way of saying that there is a difference between what you propose and what your competitors propose, but that difference is somehow not very deep and meaningful.
Sure.
It's at a level where the customer says, yeah, your proposal is different, but I cannot see the significance of that difference.
Mm. Mm.
I call it a shallow differentiation. Some people call it surface level differentiation. And last thing is, this is more about the presentation of your solution. Even if you have done everything correct, if you make an intimidatingly long presentation, this is very personal, it doesn't have to apply to everybody, but I've generally seen that large decks ask for increased effort on the part of the prospect to pay attention, to process the information you are giving, and to tie all the loose ends themselves. A very long message is not a very focused message. Do not make them work harder than they need to.
Sure. We don't want to exert our brains if we don't necessarily have to. Solutioning is such a linchpin of conversion rates and revenue and all that. It's such a linchpin of the whole funnel. I want to drill this a little more, Casey, with you. So, can you compare and contrast for us? What does good solutioning look like? What does bad solutioning look like?
I would say good and bad are little subjective. Let's call them effective versus not so effective solutioning.
Sure.
I'll talk about effective solution. I think the beginning has to be very solid, which means that you have to understand the as is situation very, very thoroughly, almost arguably better than the prospect can do it themselves. This is the most energy consuming part of the whole solutioning, because you're actually trying to get into their shoes and you're trying to block out your realities. Now I am my customer. I am not different from my prospect anymore. I am my prospect. I am in that company. I am in this industry. And now let me see where I am. Let me take stock. Because if you leave anything untouched or anything uninvestigated at this point, you are essentially building on an incomplete or a faulty foundation, and everything that you are going to do after this will always have a question mark on it, because most people generally can judge whether your solution is going to look good or not just by looking at whether you are in sync with them or not. So it's very important that you get it right, because on multiple levels it matters. One is it gives you a strong foundation for where the prospect is today. The second is the very fact that you are able to identify that gives them the confidence that you are not going to build something like a castle in the air. That needs very solid creative research and also fearless questioning. You don't have to be afraid to ask very solid questions to the prospect. And sometimes I've seen that they get tremendously excited because they can sense that you are feeling your way towards where they are today, and it builds that fantastic level of empathy without actually trying to do anything else fancy. Second is, if you are proactively pitching, then you are also responsible for defining the goal or the end state. But if the other person has requested you for a solution like an RFP or something, then you know where they are trying to go. It means using numbers, not words, but numbers. And then comes the most creative part of solutioning, which is to literally make a bucket list of all the different ways that you can go from here to there. So a good solution tells you that there are these 5 different ways to go from A to B, right? The person gets the confidence that you have thoroughly examined all the different possibilities. And then you say, okay, out of all these possible ways of getting from A to B, I have already stack ranked these possibilities or approaches according to my research or assumption. So again, you are communicating, hey, I am cutting out your work. I have done the thinking, and here is the stack rank. And then, of course, after giving a stack rank, you want to give your recommendation fearlessly, very confidently, courageously, with a good amount of reasoning, saying, out of all these 5 that I have showed you, this is the one that I would recommend for your situation, especially. And lastly, of course, doing all of this in a very gentle and friendly way, more conversational. You want to invite them into your thinking process, and you don't want to drag them or have any quality of unwelcome persuasion. Don't try to force it on them, but invite them to look at it like how you have looked at it, because their resistance levels will go down if they perceive it as an invitation as opposed to a solution, you know.
Sure. Yeah.
So
Sure.
this is how I feel a good solution works. A, as is defined very clearly. B, the goal defined very clearly. C, find out all the ways to get from where you are to where you want to be. Stack rank them according to a certain logic, and share your recommendation, and do all this in a very casual not so serious manner. If you don't do any of these things, automatically that comes across as an ineffective solutioning.
I definitely picked up on this point of giving choice and stacked ranking because, in my experience, also I've observed that when customers see a choice versus just one direction, they don't go down the path of this anxiety and fear of losing control. They have the choices are theirs to make. So I think that's a very valid point.
Choice has an irresistible attraction to human beings. Even in cases where they don't have any reason to make that choice, if they are still offered a choice, they will still start engaging with the choices and think about it.
Yeah,
The best example is when you go to any person, child or adult, and say, pick one finger. They will not ask you, why are you asking me to pick? They'll simply pick one. That is the power of choice in a very funny and light-hearted
sure.
manner.
Nobody likes to be sold to. Everybody likes to be given options to choose from.
Yeah, to pick.
Casey, you clearly helped us understand how to go about building a world-class solutioning. You have put the spotlight on the telltale signs of bad solutioning. You use the examples of effective versus ineffective. I want to get under the hood a little bit here and ask you, what are the personality traits that one must have to become this solution architect that you just mentioned? What are the skill sets that would be needed in this individual?
It's pretty amazing that you asked this. I think one characteristic which I think the person naturally must possess as an intrinsic or inherent trait in them is that they must just like finding solutions. I do not think there is a way to fake that. Although I feel that it can be developed under a good coach's guidance. You're going to pick up that spirit of a problem is always good because a problem is a doorway to money. The second is a certain bias for delaying the decision making and not coming up with instant answers, because instant answers prevent you from thinking further. So instead of going for speed, if you go for depth, that's a great thing. And this is something we all can practice. It's not beyond any of our capabilities.
Sure,
I am not going to blurt out an instant answer
sure.
because instant answers usually are not right. Last thing I would say is reinventing the wheel is never a great idea. So if you can read up on how other people are solving it, you can use those techniques. Yeah.
Small role play here. Let's say I'm the head of sales. And obviously, I would want my solutioning team to be a combination of Superman, Batman, and Wonder Woman all put together. But that combination is not one that you can hire for, or at least not hire in a very scalable way. I, as a sales VP, would have a vested interest to build an institution where solutioning is a practice that is nurtured. So, in the absence of Superman, Batman, and Wonder Woman combined, how would you actually build a program where a mere mortal can become a good solutioning architect and really contribute to revenue growth?
Yeah, you can do that by building out a set of questions,
Sure.
because each of the traits of a good effective solution that we spoke about can actually be turned into questions that start that kind of a thought process.
Sure.
If you have those defined as a stepwise process and your job is just to answer one question at a time
Mhm.
and convince your own colleagues and your sales head that this is a good answer to this question.
Can you give us a simple but still a robust framework so that we can always apply it to come up with a good solution, not do a shoddy job at solutioning?
Yeah, I have followed one framework for a long time. It's a framework which has the acronym SEE.
Mhm.
It stands for success, effort, and emotion. So those are the three buckets that I constantly check for whether I'm delivering on those three buckets or not.
Mhm.
S stands for success, which means these are the hard metrics of success. Are we increasing the prospects revenue by 2% as they desire? You cannot afford to not have a precise answer. And this is where I fear that most people stop and not do the next two things, which are actually the ingredients of a compelling solution. The effort part says minimize or eliminate the effort of the prospect or the end user for whom you are solving this problem, because nobody likes to put effort in things. It's a natural tendency to expect great results without great efforts. And I dare say that we have been spoiled to a great extent by the Ubers and the Apples, where they give great results and not ask us to put great efforts. So, under the pressure of that high bar or an expectation set by other people, it makes sense to include this as another compulsory bucket in the framework. That's why E for effort, minimize or eliminate the effort. And the last part is another E, which stands for emotion. In this case, you want to consciously provide positive emotions along the way. So when they buy your product, somebody is going to use it, right? As they start using it, do they have to wait for the very end in order to feel good, or can they feel good along the way? I compare it with two types of tablets that we get in medicine. One of them is called sustained release, which I think releases the dose in a little bit throughout. It's a very good analogy for this point, because you don't want to reserve all the great delight and positive emotion at the very end of the user's journey with that product. You want that journey to be sprinkled with some
Sure.
kind of pixie dust, positive emotions. So if
Mhm.
you consciously think about how can you cater to that very human need of, I want to feel good, I want to look good in front of others, I want to feel good within myself, I want to appear smart, I want to have a great story to tell with this product. It's a very natural human urge. If you can do something in each of these buckets, I'm very sure that you will out solution your competitors.
Mhm. Mhm.
I have a great deal of confidence in this because I have implemented this framework for at least 2.5, 3 years. By no means is it my original framework. I found this framework and I thought, wow, what a framework to apply to solutioning.
Mhm.
Because even buying experience is one kind of a customer experience.
Yeah.
Wherever experience comes into picture, success, effort, and emotion are the natural three factors to look for.
What I picked up there was particularly on the effort front. Sales teams, in their pursuit of an opportunity, talk a great deal about the effort involved in an initiative from their organization's point of view. But obviously, every initiative is a collaborative one, and the customer always wants to know how much time his or her team will have to invest into this solution. You are very upfront that this is my share of the effort, but hey, Mr. Customer, you have these 100 man hours that you have to dedicate your team to. So I think that's a great point. Casey, like you said, is pretty simple. I think I'm starting to see it. um, how do you really apply this framework?
Yeah, there is no great secret here. It's just the rigor of application. If we apply some first principles thinking, experience happens to a human because experience lives inside a human mind and a human heart. So, if we can simply keep the human beings involved in this whole solution in terms of groups, not each person, but groups. For example, the very end user of that solution is the ultimate beneficiary of that solution. They are one group which matter a lot because everything is being done only for them. Second is the people who assist in the deployment and running day to day of that solution. So the admins and the various engineers who are supporting that product, the back end people, the people behind the scenes, they matter a great deal because you don't want to discount their experience
Mhm.
and make it a nightmare because it's already hard enough to do these things. On top of it, if you see that the customer is having a great time and you are having a terrible time, it just really hurts.
Yeah.
Last human being is the prospect themselves, because they are the ones who are actually entertaining you with this entire conversation. They have obviously a vested interest in seeing this solution successful, because they will have their own promotions, they need to justify their role. So you have to think about that person and their experience also, the entire buying and managing and steering committee experience.
Sure.
These three groups of human beings, if you keep in mind, I think you will do a great job.
That's helpful. The other question that comes to my mind, every senior leader is in some way responsible for revenues, and you are too. However, a solution architect or a customer success leader may not necessarily be revenue to the point of a quota carrying salesperson. I've been guilty of this myself, but folks from the sales profession are a little edgy, a little impatient. What you have described definitely looks like an in-depth exercise, and therefore it is going to take time. So when you have pressures from your sales team, how do you respond to your sales leaders when they are kind of breathing down your neck?
Well, they always do that. I like to take inspiration from just asking myself this question: has anybody else been in this situation before? Computer scientists have talked about design patterns now for donkey's years. In fact, there are famous textbooks written on design patterns, so people don't have to reinvent the wheel. So I think a great help is to form a library of those patterns of problem and solution. There are clever ways of doing it by looking at the great solutions all around you today. And if you invest about a month's time, I'm very confident that without breaking your heads, you can easily put up a very, very decent library of problem pattern and solution patterns. You are not trying to serve the entire world. You are limited to a particular vertical or domain. There is a boundary around what you do. So you really have to look at what are the kind of problems that happen in that boundary for your clients. We have built something called the Idea Bank, which is a lifesaver because, as you said, when you're under pressure of time, you really want to go and just open the Idea Bank and look at what's the nearest readily available answer. And that cuts out 70% of my thinking. Then I just have to spend that extra 1-2 days in customizing that for the actual problem.
I'm glad you talked about a very healthy compromise where you're not compromising on quality, but you're still helping your sales team meet their revenue goals.
Yeah, I think it also serves the cause of the solutioning team itself, because who enjoys repeated thinking? Nobody. I mean, the answer is outright nobody.
Hmm.
So if you can avoid thinking, you actually must. The only smart thing is, if you are doing something new, please make sure that that goes into the library in an easily referenceable or indexable form, so that you can always pull it out and use it quickly.
Yeah. And in a way, that itself is probably the fundamental pillar of scale. This is interesting, Casey. I'm enjoying this conversation because engineers, solution architects, folks that have a more technical inclination bring a different perspective to sales, whereas sales guys have a different world that they live in. This is definitely very refreshing. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself? What are some of your non-work, passions? How do you keep yourself happy and healthy?
I have a few hobbies that I dedicate my time to. One of them is now grown to a point where it's not exactly a hobby anymore, but it's an important part of my life and very enriching part. And that is, I teach what is called mathematical thinking and problem solving. I work in the capacity of a coach to both children who are at school, also working adults. I started doing this about 8 years ago. It somehow magically just works its way into what I'm doing at work. It helps you to become faster and efficient in breaking problems down. So that is something that I do on a very serious and regular basis. I love to read books and see what people in various other domains are doing. Usually the more distant and unfamiliar the domain is, the higher its attraction in my mind, because I get to hear totally wacky and different perspectives.
That's really interesting, the concept about problem solving. I think about it quite often because a lot of the sales literature that's out there kind of finds their roots in books that were written in the late 80s and the early 90s with a very strong sense that you really have to hustle it out. And I was not on board with that message because I think sales today, and increasingly so in the future, is becoming a real job of a problem solver.
Yeah.
I could relate to some of the comments that you made. Yeah. So
I would like to say one thing in that regard is that the salesperson per se does not have to own the entire solution, because it's too much to ask. But I think if the salesperson is a good auditor of a solution that is going out from their solutioning team, that itself would be of tremendous value to that salesperson and to the company. Because even though you don't have the time to create something yourself, you certainly can be a good judge of what has been done. Those simple thumb rule checks can suddenly give that extra confidence to the salesperson to go and put that real involvement in the pitch. And you'll speak differently. You'll come across as a lot more sure of what you're doing. Don't have to be a good solver yourself, but definitely try to become a good auditor of a problem which someone else solved.
I think that's great feedback, and even more appropriate because a sales guy might not have as much time as the solutioning team would have to build it. You're absolutely right. Auditor of a solution is a equally valuable skill. Okay, this has been a great conversation. I'm glad you took time to come to the Sales School podcast because I always wanted to hear the perspective of leaders who don't carry quota, but without whom no sales guy can meet quota. You helped us understand the importance of solutioning. You helped us compare and contrast good or effective solutioning versus ineffective solutioning. I've always admired you as a differentiated thinker. So, what is it that we as a community can do to build a great generation of sellers who think differently, who are problem solvers at heart? What will we have to do to continue to build those skill sets as a community?
I respect salespeople a lot because they are the ones generating the revenue for the company and feeding everybody else in a certain way. Because they're under such tremendous pressure, they are always short of time. So I want to say only two things which they can very well do within that short time. Even though you are a seller, you are also a consumer of somebody else's products and services. And every time you like something, you can pause and ask yourself, what do I like about this? Why do I like this one so much? That's called learning from experience. You don't need special time. You don't need special books. You just have to pay attention to how you feel about a certain product yourself as a consumer. And it's a great way to rapidly learn because you're always using great products. That's one. Second is, I'm just repeating that you don't have to be a problem solver yourself, but I think if you act as the gatekeeper or the auditor of a solution, at least you will save yourself the tremendous embarrassment of having to present something which is not very bright or very smart.
Sure.
And
I always like recommendations that you can practically apply. Even
yes.
if you just build the habit of, okay, I like this. Why do I like this? It's just
Yeah.
observing. And second is, I know what my customer wants, or I'm deeply invested in my customer's success. Now I want to audit your solution if it meets the need. So
Yes.
both consume less time, you can implement it. There is no excuse for not implementing it. Great feedback. Hopefully we'll circle back with you in a future episode and you'll have more to share with us then. So thank you so much, Casey.
Thank you, Bhaskar.